My parents told me to leave the house before the will reading even started, said it wasn't my place to be there, said it would be easier for everyone if I just went home. And I almost listened. I almost got in my car and drove away, but something stopped me. And 20 minutes later, my grandfather's lawyer opened his briefcase and made sure I understood exactly why I needed to stay. If you've ever been told you didn't belong in a room you had every right to be, stay with me, because this story is about to show you what happens when someone finally refuses to leave. My name is Angela. I was 27 years old the year my grandfather Otis passed away, working as a pharmacy technician and sharing a small apartment with a roommate because rent in the city had gotten completely out of control and my salary hadn't kept pace with it. I wasn't the successful one in my family. That title belonged to my older brother Kevin, who'd become a regional manager at a logistics company by 29 and never let a single family gathering pass without some version of a humble brag, disguised as casual conversation. My parents, Frank and Denise, had built a comfortable life in the suburbs, the kind with a finished basement and a boat they used twice a year. And somewhere along the way, they developed the habit of treating me like I was a slightly disappointing footnote in an otherwise successful family story. I wasn't close to my parents, not the way children are supposed to be close to the people who raised them, but I was close to my grandfather Otis in a way that felt almost like it belonged to a different family entirely. Grandpa Otis had spent 35 years as a mechanic, running his own auto shop out of a converted garage behind his house, fixing cars for people in the neighborhood at prices that barely covered his costs, because he said a man who could fix something shouldn't overcharge someone who genuinely needed the help. He drove the same pickup truck for over 2 decades and wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation, and most people who knew him casually assumed he was barely scraping by, when in reality, he'd quietly invested nearly everything he'd saved over 4 decades into a modest but steadily growing portfolio he never once mentioned at family dinners. Every Sunday morning, for as long as I can remember, I drove out to his garage before church and sat on an old metal stool while he worked on whatever project had come in that week. And we talked about everything and nothing: baseball scores, neighborhood gossip, the weather, the particular satisfaction of fixing something that had been broken. He never once asked why I wasn't further along in my career, never compared me to Kevin, never made me feel like my life needed to look a certain way to be worth something. He asked how I was actually doing, and then he waited patiently for an honest answer, something my own parents had somehow never learned how to do. When he was diagnosed with lung cancer 18 months before he died, a diagnosis that came as a shock given he'd never smoked a day in his life, everything about how my family treated him began to shift in ways that made my stomach turn. Suddenly, my parents were visiting more frequently, but their visits had a strange transactional quality to them. Questions about the garage's value, questions about whether he'd considered signing the property over early to avoid complications down the road, questions that had nothing to do with how he was actually feeling and everything to do with what would eventually happen to what he owned. I didn't visit because I wanted anything. I visited because I couldn't stand the thought of him facing something this frightening without someone beside him who actually cared how he felt rather than what he had. I rearranged my work schedule to drive him to chemotherapy appointments, sat with him through the long hours of treatment, learned to manage the nausea medication and the fatigue and the slow, cruel progression of a disease that took a strong man and made him fragile in ways none of us were prepared to watch. My parents visited on weekends, usually for less than an hour, and Kevin visited even less than that, sending flowers instead. An arrangement so large and impersonal it looked like something ordered for a business acquaintance rather than a dying grandfather. "You're the only one who actually shows up, Angie," he told me one afternoon in the chemotherapy waiting room, his voice quieter than it used to be, but his eyes still holding that same sharp warmth I'd known my whole life. "Your parents ask about the shop. Kevin sends flowers, but you just sit here with me, every single time." I told him that was because sitting with him was never a burden. It was the best part of a week that otherwise felt exhausting and uncertain. And he squeezed my hand and told me I reminded him of my grandmother, a woman who'd passed before I was old enough to really remember her. A compliment that meant more to me than almost anything anyone had ever said to me before. He passed away on a cold morning in early winter, quietly, in his own bed, in the small house behind the garage where he'd lived for over 40 years, with a hospice nurse present and me sitting beside him holding his hand, the same hand that had taught me how to check my own oil and change a tire when I was 16. I called my mother from his bedroom, my voice shaking apart with every word, and she answered sounding tired rather than devastated, told me she'd handle telling everyone else, and hung up within a minute, leaving me alone in that quiet house with a grief so heavy I could barely stand up straight. The funeral was arranged for the following week at a large funeral home downtown, far more elaborate than anything my grandfather would have wanted. A man who lived his entire life in flannel shirts and a garage that smelled permanently of motor oil. My mother insisted on the venue, said it needed to reflect the family properly, and I remember standing in the parking lot before the service started, wondering when exactly my family had decided that Grandpa Otis's death was an opportunity to reflect anything about themselves at all. I arrived early, wanting a few quiet minutes before the crowd showed up, and instead found my parents and Kevin already there near the casket, their conversation low but unmistakably charged. The way conversations sound when people are trying not to appear excited about something they clearly are. I heard my father say the word property. I heard my mother mention the garage's location, something about how commercial real estate values had shifted in that part of town. I heard Kevin laughing quietly at something on his phone, an image I still can't fully process, laughing at his phone during his own grandfather's funeral before the man had even been laid to rest. The service itself was long and formal, filled with tributes from neighbors and longtime customers whose cars he'd fixed for decades, stories about his generosity, his honesty, the way he'd once fixed an elderly widow's transmission for free because he knew she couldn't afford it and never told anyone about it until she mentioned it herself years later at church. My mother gave a eulogy about family closeness that made my jaw ache from clenching it, considering how transactional her visits had become in his final months. Kevin didn't speak at all. After the burial, Everyone gathered at my parents' house for what they called a repast, though the mood in that living room felt closer to a business meeting than a memorial service. A lawyer named Mr. Delgado arrived about an hour in, carrying a briefcase and a thick folder, and the moment he walked through the door, I watched my family's collective posture shift, the way certain animals go still right before they strike. "Angela," my mother said, pulling me aside near the staircase, her voice dropping into the particular tone she used when she wanted something without technically asking for it directly. "I think it would be easier if you headed home before the will reading starts. This is really a matter for the immediate family to handle, and there's no reason for you to be here for it." I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for even a flicker of awareness to cross her face, waiting for her to hear what she just said and correct herself. It never came. "I am immediate family," I said quietly. "I don't understand why I wouldn't be included." "Of course you're family, technically," she said, in that exact tone people use when they've already decided your feelings don't factor into the outcome at all. "But let's be practical, sweetheart. Your grandfather understood how these things work. This is going to involve decisions about the property and the finances, and honestly, given your situation, it might just be simpler if you weren't in the room for it." My situation. As if working an honest job and sharing an apartment to make rent was somehow a disqualifying condition rather than just an ordinary 27-year-old's life. My father joined the conversation at that point, his voice carrying the particular authority he always used when he wanted something to sound final rather than up for discussion. "Your mother's right, Angela. Just head home. We'll call you once everything's settled, let you know if there's anything relevant to you." Kevin, standing nearby with a drink in hand, added his own contribution without being asked, the way he always did. "Yeah, sis, probably better if you're not here for this part. No offense, but you know how these things go. If you've ever been in a room where your own family decided your presence was optional, tell me in the comments, because what happened next is the exact moment everything changed. I wanted to leave right then. I wanted to walk out of that house and never come back, to let them have their briefcase and their property discussions and their performance of family unity, and simply remove myself from all of it permanently. But something kept my feet rooted to that staircase, some quiet stubbornness that had been building for years of being treated like the disappointing footnote in a family story that never had room for me in the first place. "I'm staying," I said, and I walked past my parents into the living room where the rest of the family had already claimed the good seats. The room went quiet when I sat down. My mother exchanged a tight look with my father. Kevin rolled his eyes but said nothing further. Nobody wanted to make a scene in front of the lawyer, not yet anyway. "Before I begin, Mr. Delgado said, settling into an armchair that had clearly been arranged just for him, opening his briefcase with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. "I need to explain that Otis made some very specific requests regarding today's reading, requests he documented approximately 14 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis, and updated once more just 2 months before he passed." A ripple of unease passed through the room. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's carefully composed expression cracked slightly at the edges. "In addition to the formal will," Mr. Delgado continued, Your father asked that I include a handwritten letter as part of this proceeding, and he was very specific about one particular instruction. He asked that before I read anything else, I confirm that his granddaughter Angela is present in the room. If she is not, he asked that I pause the reading entirely and reschedule until she could be here. The room fell into a stunned silence. My mother's face had gone pale. My father's jaw tightened visibly. "She's here," my mother said quickly, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something caught between confusion and dawning alarm. "Good, mister," Delgado said simply, and he opened the folder, pulling out a plain envelope, and from it, a folded sheet of paper, the handwriting on it visibly shaky in the particular way that comes from a body failing, while the mind inside remains completely sharp. "To my family," he read, his voice steady and measured. "If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and there are things I need to say now that I never found the right moment to say while I was still here to say them properly." He paused, glancing around the room before continuing. "I spent 35 years fixing things that were broken, and I always believed if something mattered enough, it was worth the time to fix it right rather than rush the job. I've come to understand, in these final months, that the same is true of family, though I wish I'd understood it sooner, before certain patterns had time to settle in so deeply." My mother's hand tightened around the edge of the couch cushion. Nobody moved. In the 18 months since my diagnosis, I paid careful attention to who actually showed up and why. I want to be honest about what I observed, because honesty is really the only inheritance worth leaving behind that actually matters. I felt my chest tighten. I looked down at my hands, not wanting to see the faces of the people around me. "Frank and Denise," the letter continued, using both my parents' names directly. "You visited more frequently after my diagnosis than you had in years prior, and I want you to know I noticed the timing of that change. Nearly every visit included a question about the garage, about the property, about arrangements for the future. I answered honestly because that's who I am, but I understood clearly what those visits actually were." My father's face had gone rigid. My mother stared at the floor. "Kevin," the letter went on, and my brother's confident posture finally began to slip. "You sent flowers instead of visiting, and while I appreciated the gesture, I want you to know that flowers cannot sit beside a hospital bed or hold a hand during a difficult treatment. I understand you're building a successful career, and I'm proud of that, but I hope someday you understand that success means very little if it costs you the people who actually needed you present." Kevin said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. There was only one person who sat with me through every single chemotherapy appointment, who learned my medication schedule without being asked, who never once mentioned the garage or the property or anything I might eventually leave behind. Mr. Delgado Reed, his voice softening. Only one person who simply wanted to be present for whatever time I had left, without any expectation attached to that presence. He looked up from the letter, and for a long moment, his eyes found mine across the room. "That person is my granddaughter, Angela." The room seemed to hold its breath entirely. My mother's mouth opened slightly and stayed that way. My father's face had gone completely pale. Kevin was staring at the floor like it had suddenly become the only thing in the world worth his attention. Mr. Delgado continued reading. Angela never once asked me for anything in all these months, not when times were hard for her financially, not when I know for a fact her own life wasn't easy. She showed up because she wanted to be there, and that is worth more than any amount of money could ever measure. This is why I specifically requested her presence today before anything else was discussed, because I wanted the very first thing said in this room to be her name, spoken clearly, in a house where I fear it hasn't been spoken with enough respect in quite some time. I felt tears building behind my eyes, and this time I let them fall without trying to stop them. I know some of you will be upset when you hear what I've decided. The letter continued. I know some of you will say it isn't fair, that Angela didn't earn this the way the rest of you believe you were entitled to it simply by being my children and grandchildren. But I ask each of you to sit with one honest question before that anger takes hold completely. What did you actually give me in these final months, beyond a question about the property? Where were you on the nights the pain kept me from sleeping? And why isn't that question sitting uncomfortably with you right now? My father's expression had gone rigid and unreadable. My mother was staring at her hands, silent. For that reason, Mr. Delgado Reed, slowing his voice to give proper weight to each word, I am leaving the majority of my estate to my granddaughter, Angela. This includes the house and garage property on Milford Road, the business accounts and equipment, and the remainder of my investment portfolio, totaling approximately $2.1 million. The number seemed to physically press against every person in that room at once. To my son Frank, my daughter-in-law Denise, and my grandson Kevin, I leave $100,000 each, along with my sincere hope that this gift encourages some real reflection on what it means to show up for someone, rather than simply asking after what they might eventually leave you. Mr. Delgado folded the letter and set it gently on the coffee table in front of him. There is one final line, he said quietly. Otis specifically requested it be read separately after a pause. He picked the paper back up. Angela, if you're listening, I want you to know that I saw you every Sunday morning at the garage, every chemotherapy appointment, every quiet moment you never thought I was paying close enough attention to notice. I asked that you be here today at the very beginning of this reading, because I never wanted you to feel like you had to be told to leave a room that was always meant to include you. This isn't charity, and it certainly isn't pity. It's simply the truth, finally spoken plainly, the way it should have been spoken years ago. Thank you for loving an old mechanic who had nothing left to offer you except love in return. The silence that followed felt endless, though it was probably only a handful of seconds. Then my mother's voice cut through it, sharp and unsteady. This can't be right, she said, standing up too quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. He was on heavy medication for months. He wasn't thinking clearly, and I think everyone in this room understands that. Otis was evaluated by 2 independent physicians at the time these documents were finalized, including the most recent update 2 months before his passing. Mr. Delgado replied calmly, without missing a beat, as though he'd anticipated this exact reaction weeks ago. Both confirmed he had full mental capacity to direct his own affairs. The evaluations are part of the estate file, should you wish to review them with your own attorney. This is completely unfair, my father said, his voice rising. You told her to leave before this even started, Denise. He specifically asked that she be here. Did you know about this?" My mother didn't answer, and the look on her face suggested she genuinely hadn't known, which somehow made the entire moment feel even more damning. The realization that she'd tried to remove me from a room my own grandfather had specifically insisted I occupy. "This is completely unfair," Kevin repeated, echoing our father, rising to his feet. "She gets everything because she showed up to some doctor's appointments. I'm his actual grandson, too." "You sent flowers," I said quietly, and it was the first thing I'd said aloud since the letter had begun. My voice shook, but I kept talking anyway. "I sat with him through every single treatment. You want to talk about what's fair? Where were you the other 17 months, Kevin?" Kevin's jaw tightened, but he had no response, and everyone in that room understood it, including him. "You don't get to stand here and act wounded," I continued, feeling something inside me finally break loose after years of being treated like the disappointing footnote in a family that never made space for me in the first place. "None of you sat with him. None of you learned his medication schedule. None of you gave up a single evening without complaint. And now you want to act like something was stolen from you after you literally tried to remove me from this room 20 minutes ago. You've always thought you were better than us," my mother said, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite shame, but sat uncomfortably close to both. "Playing the devoted granddaughter, making the rest of us look bad by comparison." "I wasn't trying to make anyone look bad," I said, and I meant every word of it. I was trying to be there for a dying man who never once made me feel like I needed to earn a place in his life. That's all this ever was for me. My father sat back down slowly, his hands trembling slightly, his voice dropping into something quieter and more controlled than his earlier outburst. "We'll be contesting this. I hope you understand that clearly. No court is going to uphold a will that specifically excludes his own children from the majority of the estate." Mr. Delgado, entirely unbothered, reached into his briefcase and produced a second folder. "You're welcome to try," he said evenly, though I should mention that Otis anticipated this exact possibility as well. The will includes a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who formally challenges this document in court automatically forfeits their inheritance entirely, including the $100,000 each of you has currently been left. I'd strongly recommend consulting your own attorney before proceeding, but I can assure you, Otis was extremely thorough, right down to requesting his granddaughter's presence before a single word was read. The room fell quiet again, though this time the silence carried a different weight, the sound of anger slowly recalculating itself against the risk of losing what little remained on the table. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected walking into that living room hours earlier. Mostly, I felt hollow and exhausted and strangely sad, like a truth had finally been spoken aloud that none of us would ever be able to take back. "I don't want a war over this," I said, looking around the room at faces that had once felt like family and now felt like strangers wearing clothes I recognized. He didn't leave me this because he wanted to punish anyone. He left it to me because he trusted me and because he wanted me in this room from the very beginning. I'm not going to turn this into something uglier than it already is just because the rest of you are upset. "How generous of you," my mother said bitterly, though the words came out weaker than she probably intended. I didn't respond to that. there wasn't anything left to say that would change how she felt about me. And honestly, after everything, I was finally too tired to keep trying. I left my parents' house that evening and drove straight to Grandpa Otis's place on Milford Road, the house and garage that now technically belonged to me, though it didn't feel real yet and wouldn't for a long time. I sat on the old metal stool in the garage, surrounded by the tools he'd used for over 4 decades, the smell of motor oil still lingering in the air, and I let myself cry properly for the first time since he died. Not because of the money, not because of the fight with my family. I cried because I missed him, plainly and completely, the particular kind of missing that leaves a hole shaped exactly like the person who's gone. A few days later, going through his things, I found a small metal toolbox tucked beneath his workbench, and inside it, beneath old receipts and spare parts, a stack of photographs I never knew existed, me sitting on the metal stool as a teenager, watching him work. Me handing him a wrench, my face focused with concentration. Me asleep in the chemotherapy waiting room chair, my hand still resting near his on the armrest. On the back of one, in his shaky handwriting, he had written a single line. "This is what showing up looks like." I sat on the garage floor for a long time holding those photographs, understanding for the first time just how closely he had been paying attention, even during moments I'd thought had passed by completely unnoticed. In the weeks that followed, my family mostly stopped speaking to me altogether. My mother sent one final message calling me manipulative, which felt darkly ironic considering she was the one who tried to remove me from the will reading entirely. My father stopped answering my calls. Kevin posted vague messages online about greed and betrayal that everyone who knew our family understood were aimed directly at me. I didn't fight any of them on it. I didn't try to defend myself or explain or beg for a forgiveness I hadn't actually done anything wrong to need. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my remaining debts for the first time in my adult life, and I kept the garage running. Hiring on a young mechanic Grandpa Otis had been informally mentoring before he got sick. Someone who genuinely mourned him at the funeral, more visibly than most of my own family had. Running that garage taught me things about him I never fully understood while he was alive. The quiet discipline it took to build something worth trusting over 4 decades. The patience required to keep showing up every single day without ever needing anyone to notice or thank him for it. Some evenings, I still sit on that same metal stool, listening to the quiet the way I used to on Sunday mornings before church, and I think about how strange it is that it took a lawyer's specific instruction, a request written into a legal document months in advance, to finally guarantee I'd have a seat in a room my own parents had tried to keep me out of. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about the inheritance, about the way it fractured what was left of my family. I've turned that question over more nights than I can count, usually sitting alone in that quiet garage after the sun goes down. And the answer I keep arriving at is always the same. I didn't fracture my family. Their own choices did that, quietly, over months and years, one dismissive comment at a time, one transactional visit at a time, one attempt to remove me from a room I had every right to occupy. The will didn't create the distance between us. It simply revealed a distance that had already existed for a very long time, one my grandfather had seen with total clarity long before the rest of us were willing to admit it. My grandfather spent the final months of his life mostly surrounded by people asking about his property, and one granddaughter who simply wanted to sit with him through whatever time he had left. In the end, he made absolutely certain the truth would be spoken plainly, in a room he specifically arranged to include me in, even after my own parents had tried to arrange otherwise. And maybe that's the part of this story that still keeps me up some nights, more than the inheritance itself ever could. It was never about the money for him. It was about making sure I finally had a seat at a table my own family had spent years quietly suggesting I didn't belong at. So I'll leave you with the same question I still don't have a clean answer for myself. If your own parents told you to leave a room before something important happened, and you found out later that the person you loved most had specifically insisted you be there all along, would that finally give you the courage to stop asking permission to take up space in your own family? Or would some part of you always wonder what else they tried to keep from you, quietly, in rooms you were never invited into at all?